Today I'm going to share with you 5 books to read in 2023 if you want to start building wealth. Now the books I'm going to cover are all incredibly varied in what they actually talk about, but they have a general theme, and that theme is to build wealth in one way or another. Now the first book that I'm going to share with you is probably one of my favorites over the last few years, and that is How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. Now Felix Dennis was an entrepreneur and a publisher. He owned multiple publishing companies, and that is how he made the majority of his money. Now what makes this book so interesting is that he has some very unconventional wisdom.
I can't make you healthy and I can't make you happy, but I can with this book, with How to Get Rich. I can massively improve your chances of becoming much richer than your neighbor.
He was an eccentric businessman. He did a lot of weird things, he made a lot of mistakes, and he shared them openly. And with a unique collection of experiences comes a unique collection of lessons. He's not just talking about theory and things that you should do, he's talking about lessons that he did learn and mistakes that he did make.
And one of the things you learn if you want to make a lot of money is that you're going to make a lot of errors.
And the premise of this book is that the best way to get rich and to build wealth is by building a business and not necessarily working for someone else. He talks a lot about how you need to become comfortable with taking risks and dealing with uncertainty, because the people who take risk and deal with uncertainty are the people who prosper from the other people doing the work. He is incredibly direct and incredibly clear, maybe a little bit harsh, about what it actually takes to make a substantial amount of money. And while I don't agree with everything he says in the book, it's interesting to see his perspective and see how he has made his money. Some of the interesting things he talked about were how he thinks about delegating and hiring other people. It's something I'm currently working on, and this book had so many interesting lessons about finding great people to work with and utilizing and creating a system for great people to do great work. He also talks about a bunch of other interesting topics, like making sure you're in a circle with other successful people, investing in yourself, and being okay with failing. And while from the premise of the book he's really talking about building wealth in the sense of building a business, there's also a lot of interesting life lessons or counterintuitive life lessons that he shares from the mistakes he's made. And really the best thing about this book is his level of self-awareness and the fact that he was not trying to play any status games or try and make himself out to be better than he really was. He didn't pretend to be the smartest person, and he shared his flaws, which is what makes this book so fascinating, because most people are not secure enough to share their flaws with everyone. People are playing status games and they want to make themselves sound smart. So the real value in this book is the fact that it is incredibly honest and incredibly open about what it takes to build wealth, the bad sides of building wealth, and really it's an account that you will not get from any other source. This is probably one of my favorite books that I've read over the last few years, so I recommend everyone checks it out if they're looking to build wealth. Now the second book that I recommend you check out in 2023 if you're looking to build wealth is The E-Myth Revisited. Now this is a book that I read when I first got into entrepreneurship and freelancing, and it didn't really click at the time because I was working as a freelancer, which is essentially a job, but a job with a lot of freedoms because you do the work that someone else sets. Now, this book talks a lot about actual entrepreneurship. It talks about building a business, and it's almost the how-to guide on thinking like an entrepreneur and setting up a business like an entrepreneur. It highlights a lot of the mistakes that new business owners make. And one of the most prominent things that this author sees is the fact that most of the time when someone sets up a business, it's because they're an expert at what they do. It's not because they're particularly savvy at business. And the problem with that is that because they're an expert at what they do, they know how to do that craft. They don't necessarily know how to set up systems, set up operations, and actually operate a business. This then creates a situation where that person who is very good at what they do end up working ridiculous hours and kind of become a slave to their business because the business does not work for them, and they end up having to do absolutely everything in the business.
You're not here to become better at what you do. You're here to create an enterprise that replicates what you do.
One of the most prominent examples in the book was of this baker. This woman was a great baker and people really loved her baking. So what she did was start a bakery. But the problem is she didn't know how to run a business. She didn't know how to hire people. She didn't know how to set up operations. She really didn't know how to do anything other than be great at baking. Now the problem was that then she had to do absolutely everything all of the time because she had to pay for bills, she had to pay rent, she had to keep the business afloat. So she ended up working ridiculously early mornings and also late evenings because she didn't know how to set her business up like a business. She only knew how to work like a worker. The E-Myth Revisited is really a book that teaches you how to go from working in your business to working on your business, so it becomes something that can work without you. And this is really one of the books that I recommend anyone who wants to get into entrepreneurship or anyone who wants to start building a business. I urge them to read this pretty much as soon as they start, because this is one of those things that kind of changes the way you think about pretty much everything. And if you want to build a wealthy life in 2023 through starting a business, then I highly recommend checking this book out. Now the next book that I'm going to recommend in some ways is almost the opposite of the E-Myth Revisited, which initially might seem a little bit confusing, but there's a reason I'm sharing this. And that book is Company of One by Paul Jarvis. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is that I think it's good to hold opposing thoughts in your head and be able to decide exactly what path you want to go down. Now, if the E-Myth Revisited is talking about setting up a business and scaling that business and the business running without you, Company of One is almost the opposite in the sense that Paul Jarvis talks about sometimes staying small and not scaling up and not doing all of this stuff to grow a massive business is the best path for you. He argues that sometimes it's good to intentionally stay small because you end up being nimble and you can be incredibly profitable. But more than anything, he argues that the best part about staying small is that you get to decide how you spend your time, the things that you work on, and really you get freedom in your life. This book is really the how-to guide on building a lifestyle business. And a common misconception with keeping a business small doesn't necessarily mean that that business doesn't make a lot of money. Because if you keep your business small, if it's incredibly focused and niche, then you could be incredibly profitable. And really a huge part of this book emphasizes a focus on choosing the right business model and focusing on being as efficient as possible. For example, we could compare running an agency with selling a digital product. Typically, an agency is going to require you to have a lot of staff. You're going to need a lot of people to fulfill the work that you do. You're probably going to need people to sell the work, so to actually get the project in the beginning. You might need people to manage the company and like operate in between. And then you're going to need the people to actually complete the work themselves. So every time you try to get more work, every time you try to earn more money, you're going to need more people, you're going to need more expenses, you're going to have to pay for more things. Now, on the other hand, with a digital product, it has something that you would call no to low marginal cost of production. And that basically means that if someone buys your digital product, you don't have to fulfill the work and it doesn't cost you anything extra for an extra person to buy that product. If you were an agency, if you went from one company to two companies paying for your product, then the chances are you'd need twice the amount of staff, you'd maybe need twice the amount of time to fulfill that work. If you were to sell a digital product, if you went from one customer to two customers, it would not cost you anything else because you've already put the time in and you've already set everything up to sell that digital product. And really building a company of one is about choosing the right business model for the lifestyle that you want to live. It's not about building a business and setting up systems just because you want to grow for the sake of growing. It's not about hiring as many people as you possibly can. It's about building a profitable business that you actually enjoy running. For Paul Jarvis, he had a mix of different business models for a long time. He took on a select few different freelance clients for a while, and then at the same time he was selling digital products. He was making small products and selling them to people. He created things like courses and WordPress tools. So you can see he had a diversified business model. He made money from products as well as freelancing. Eventually he then moved on to building software. And really the reason I think this is a great book to read when you're trying to build wealth is that it helps to have multiple ideas in your head and assess how they play out in your own life. Maybe you want to build a business that is going to be really scalable, or maybe you just want to focus as much as possible on how to get rich, or maybe you just want to focus on building a lifestyle business that maybe makes a lot of money but gives you wealth in other ways. Maybe you want more control over your time and maybe you don't want people to rely on you. This is one of those books that kind of runs counter counterintuitive to a lot of the other books you'd read on building wealth and building businesses. But I think it's important to be exposed to these ideas and choose what aligns with your goals best. Now, the fourth book I recommend when trying to build wealth is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And I recommend this book all the time because it is just so good. In the book, Steven Pressfield shares this idea of resistance. And resistance is something that is trying to sabotage us from getting to our end goal, from achieving things that we want to achieve. It's really that paralyzing fear that stops you from taking action.
Resistance to me is sort of like the villain in a movie.
And resistance can take many different forms, from procrastination to self-doubt to fear. But to overcome that resistance, we need to build the discipline and ability to move in spite of that fear. And really, resistance is one of those things that blocks so many people when they're trying to build wealth. You might have an idea or you might know what it is that you want to do, but there's something inside stopping you from taking action. Most of the time, that is a form of resistance. It's something that is this invisible force stopping you from doing things that are uncomfortable. I mean, honestly, I had resistance to sit down and record this YouTube video because I haven't recorded it in a while, and that resistance just starts to build up. If you do not exercise the discipline and continue to take action, resistance becomes almost paralyzing. It stops you from taking action.
And it seems to me that overcoming resistance is far more important than talent or anything else.
And now what I really like about this book is that it frames resistance as exactly what it is. It's something that you can only get past by putting in the reps and actually doing that thing over and over again. This is one of those books that I read almost every year. Now, one thing with this book is I typically skip the last section of it because he starts talking about like angels and God and stuff, and it's not really for me. But his first 2/3 of this book is probably one of the best things I've read in terms of like a self-helpy kind of book. And this is something that I definitely recommend if you're looking to build wealth and you're struggling with that resistance of getting started and almost that force dragging you down. And the fifth and final book that I recommend reading in 2023 if you're looking to build wealth is The Courage to Be Disliked. Now, I don't have the physical copy of this book, but I read this on Kindle and it is one of my most highlighted books I've ever read on my Kindle. For me, this book has been one of those great mental unlocks when it comes to self-acceptance and being okay with being disliked. And ultimately, if you're gonna do things that build wealth and you're gonna do things that challenge yourself, you need to be okay with this idea of putting yourself out there and being okay if people don't like you. This is something that has stopped me a lot in the past, and it's something that I see stops a lot of other people. They don't want to be judged by other people and they feel self-conscious. So the way this book is written is as a conversation between this philosopher and a student. The student is incredibly skeptical of the philosopher, and the philosopher talks a lot about a school of psychology called Adlerian psychology. In the book, he talks a lot about how the key to happiness is accepting your current circumstances and accepting where you currently are, rather than trying to change your current circumstances to try and meet the expectations of other people. And in the book, the philosopher shares a lot of lessons with the student about thinking for yourself and forming your own values and beliefs. And this is really important because if you don't do this, you end up letting everyone else do your thinking for you. You end up trying to conform to the crowd, which means that whenever you try to go off and do your own thing, you feel incredibly uncomfortable. You're not okay with being disliked and not okay with not fitting in. And he talks about how the key to personal growth and happiness is really leaning into this individuality. It's leaning into who you are as a person and accepting that and being okay with showing that off to other people. As the philosopher says, no matter what occurred in your life up to this point, it should have no bearing at all on how you live from now on. For me, this is one of those books where when I was reading it, just completely random things in life started to make a little bit more sense. This Adlerian school of psychology is something that I'd never really heard about, but when I started to read this book, there was so many just like great nuggets in here, and I'm like, this is just great. Before reading this book, I'd never heard of the Adlerian School of Psychology. When I was reading it, so many things just started to make sense. There was so many interesting pieces in here which can be used as mental frameworks for making your own decisions and understanding how things play out in your own life. In terms of a self-improvement-y kind of book, this is one of the most dense books I've ever read. It's not overly like a massive book, but there were so many things I highlighted in this book book and so many kind of like tidbits of knowledge, which I felt like have really kind of reframed the way I think. I'd highly recommend checking out The Courage to Be Disliked if you're looking to become okay with thinking for yourself and being okay with being disliked, because if you want to build wealth, you're gonna need to follow your own path and do things your own way. And there you have it. There are 5 books to read in 2023 if you want to build wealth. If you think there'd be any other great books that'd fit in with this list, then drop them in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.